Anna said nothing about her brother on the walk to school the next morning. I didn't think she would. He lived at the university, and it would probably be a while before anyone in her family knew he'd left. Remember, her brother Peter left with some students visiting from the West, right? In the car, they snuck him or smuggled him out. I wondered if Peter had left behind a note of explanation or if he would send a word to them once he was free. I wondered how they'd feel afterward, proud of his courage or ashamed that he'd abandoned them. And I wanted to know if Peter would ever look back with regret for what he had done. Would I, if it were me who left? I glanced at Anna's cheerful expression and felt rash of guilt for knowing what she did not. It's just as cold today, she said. Hopefully it will begin to feel like spring soon. The weather was trivial, boring. So were the books in her hands and her annoyance with the boy who pulled her hair when the teacher wasn't looking. Anna wasn't even thinking about her brother today, and all I could think about was whether he was still alive. Are you feeling okay, Goethe? Anna often preferred to interpret my moodiness as illness. It was the way she tried to understand me. Springtime, sure. Was that even what she'd ask? My mind was at checkpoint Charlie, where Peter would have crossed into the west. Fritz said that the car had been specially designed to hide him, but the border guards always searched carefully, and they had dogs and maybe other detection devices as well. I tried to picture Peter sitting in a coffee shop with the other students right now, laughing at how easy it had all been. Remember, they have no individuality. They have no freedom where they are living in the East, right? But the West is controlled by the United States and France and England, and so they have that freedom. They have that ability to go where they want to go. But in the East, since it's controlled by communists, they do not. But I couldn't laugh, not yet. What if you had the chance to go to the West? I suddenly asked Anna. Would you? Anna stopped, glanced around to see if anyone was nearby. When she was sure we were alone, she started walking again, then said, Don't ask questions like that. Don't even think questions like that. It was wise advice, though I never could stop my thoughts from coming. They just did, all the time. Maybe I wasn't trying hard enough to stop them. I knew I wasn't. As we approached the same area where I had seen Dominic yesterday, remember, her brother, I looked around for any border police. At least for now, the street was empty. Then I turned toward the platform on the west, but nobody was there. Still, I shuffled my feet and walked slower, just in case. Anna seemed to know what I was doing and grabbed my arm. Please, don't, Goethe. He won't come back after seeing you get in trouble yesterday. Maybe not, but I still had a hope. Help me keep an eye out for the guards, and we won't get in trouble, I said. Anna huffed, but she began looking around. We couldn't walk as slowly as I wanted. Other students were on our heels, meaning catching up, trying to get to school before this cold rain turned to snow. I kept my head down, except for the occasional peek to my right. There was nothing, and then nothing again. And then just before we passed by, Dominic's blonde head rose into sight. I stopped, but didn't wave. Anna gasped and told me not to look. I ignored that and replied, He's my brother. I'll bet Officer Mueller has family on the other side too. You can't split a city in half and not divide everyone into some way. Dom didn't wave this time. Instead, he motioned at someone below him to come up. I barely breathed as I anticipated who it must be. My father. His head rose higher with every step up the platform ladder. He wore glasses now, and his light brown hair seemed thinner. It seemed odd to finally see him, looking much as I remembered him, yet it had been so long I felt I scarcely knew him anymore. He waved only once and wiped a tear from his eyes with the back of his hand. I think I needed to see that, to know he missed me as desperately as I missed him. But then he did something I didn't expect. He danced! Not the formal dances the adults knew, but the silly dance he used to do for me all those years ago, the one from the Farmer in March. He started by pantomiming the farmer's wife telling the maids to get back to work. His movements were from the song's second verse. We had sung this so many times together when I was younger that the lyrics and the actions were etched into my brain. It still ran through my head sometimes at night when he wasn't there to tuck me in. They have a lot to do in the home and the garden, the song went. They dig and they rake, they sing a song. My mouth formed the words even as he performed, and the cheery tune rang in my mind. With that second line, my father pretended to hold a shovel and dig. But when he should have moved to the rake, he only continued the digging motions, looking up at me very deliberately on purpose, and then made a silly bow, just as he had when we used to do the song together years earlier. I smiled and acted out in applause, just as I used to do. Then he motioned that I should leave and keep walking. I nodded obediently, faced forward again. Then Anna and I walked away. You could have gotten us arrested just now, she scolded me. And for what? A silly dance? Papa was playful like that. It used to be my favorite song. But Anna shook her head. He wouldn't have you take that risk just to show you a dance. No, you're right, he wouldn't. It took me the whole day to think about it, while the others dutifully studied geometry, Russian vocabulary, and whatever else we learned that day. I considered Anna's suggestion that perhaps there had been a message in his words. Why had Papa chosen to pantomime sign from the middle of the song? If he had wanted me to think about this time of the year, March, then the beginning of the song would have made more sense. And if he had just danced to bring up the fun memories, the final verse was the silliest to perform. So why choose the middle? I figured it out during reading that afternoon. 45 minutes in which I could not recall a single word I read. It came down to the mistake Papa had made in his performance, where he should have changed from a shovel to a rake. He only kept digging, and that was the end of his dance. He was digging. Papa wanted me to dig, but why? Chapter 8. Fear was the most powerful weapon possessed by the Stasi. Remember the police? David Cook, British author. Years ago, Mama and some other women in our building used to garden in a small patch of dirt behind our apartment. They enjoyed the work, and the food from the garden was very good. But one year, the food shortages had been particularly fierce, and the harvest disappeared into the hands of those who walked by it each day, meaning it was stolen. Mama never gardened again, said it wasn't worth the bother. I found the shovel after school right where she had left it. It was tucked in a forgotten corner of the basement, along with the things other families in our building had no room for upstairs. There were many boxes and crates and dusty surplus extra tins left over from the war that probably weren't even edible anymore. Tins like of food, like sardines or like canned food. Nobody ever went down here, though. The corners always stayed dark, and every time I came, it felt like the roof and the dirt floor were closer to each other than the time before. Although my instinct was to leave the basement as soon as possible, I forced myself to stay and stare at the shovel, as if another hard look would somehow help me understand what Papa wanted me to do. Perhaps he wanted me to encourage Mama to start gardening again, or for me to plant one myself. No, I didn't think so. He had pantomimed the lyrics for digging, not for planting. Digging. Maybe before he left, he had buried some sort of treasure nearby. Papa must be worried about our family, and of course he'd want to take care of us. Well, he didn't need to worry. Fritz's after-school bricklaying job helped us with money. Sure, we didn't have a television, but Anna did if there was anything I really wanted to watch. Most of our entertainment came from Fritz's record player, which was good enough most of the time. And we had no trabant like other families, but it was okay where we needed to go, and besides, they were ugly cars anyways. Oh, so a trabant must be a car. Still, if Papa had some sort of treasure buried in the area, I wanted to find it. I hope to see him again at the viewing platform soon so I could try to figure out where to dig. Fritz didn't get home that night by supper, which was unusual. But sometimes his bricklaying required extra time at work, and so Mama and I didn't think much of going ahead without him. He probably would get back before supper was finished. This is better anyways. Mama's shoulders seemed heavier than usual, and just seeing them made mine feel heavy too. I had some very sad news at work today and wanted to share it with you in private. I set down my fork and looked over at her. I couldn't imagine what must have happened, and already a pit was forming in my stomach. Your friend, Anna, has an older brother, doesn't she? A boy named Peter? If she had not spoken another word, I would have already known how Mama's story was going to end. I wanted to press my hands over my ears, pretending if I couldn't hear it, then it didn't happen. But life never works that way, and all I could do was close my eyes and pray that I was wrong. Anna's parents got a visit from the Stasi police this afternoon. Peter attempted an escape last night, hidden in a special panel of a car from the west. He was discovered before reaching the border and tried to make a run to the west, but they shot him in the back. In all the confusion, the students driving the car were able to escape, but Peter didn't make it. Mama grabbed my hand and gave it a squeeze. Anna probably got the news once she came home from school. The family has been allowed a day home tomorrow to mourn his loss, but this will be a terrible time for them. I thought you should know. It's a reminder to us all what happens to those who try to escape. They die. Tears rolled from my cheeks, but I didn't care if Mama saw. I couldn't begin to imagine the pain that Anna and her family must be feeling right now. She loved her brother just as much as I loved both of mine. Losing one of them would feel like my whole world was coming to an end. Fritz would feel awful too. He'd feel guilty for knowing Peter's plan and not stopping him. Wait, Fritz had known, and he still wasn't home. Why isn't Fritz back from work? I tried not to sound as worried as I was. After all, he had been late before, but not often, and Fritz had said nobody knew Peter's secret but him. What if Fritz had tried to escape too? Although she only had the smallest understanding of why my face was suddenly flushed and my hands were shaking, Mama said she knew I was upset and asked if I needed some time alone. I left the table and practically ran into Fritz's room. I had half expected to see a note on his pillow, too. Some words of apology and an explanation for his own escape attempt. There was nothing, so maybe it was just my imagination. But every minute that passed sharpened my worries. Fritz was never this late. I reappeared in the kitchen where my mother was finishing cleaning up, except for the plate she had left out for Fritz. Can we go to his job site and look for him? I asked. Please, Mama, can we go and find him? Mama pressed her eyebrows together. Goethe, I know the news about Anna's brother upset you, but Fritz and Peter were friends, I said. Fritz knew about the escape. Without another word, Mama set down her dish rag and hurried to get a coat. Minutes later, we were outside, pressing through the busy city streets, deeper into East Berlin, where Fritz had been hired to help lay brick for a new building. So much of Berlin had been destroyed in the war, and even now, 20 years later, piles of rubble were still strewn about the city. The government was rebuilding as quickly as they could, but it took a lot of resources to maintain that wall. Their second priority was rebuilding public places, or areas near the border that were meant to show how superior, better, our system was. It was beyond the glossy scenes that everything remained in the ruins. Every day after school, Fritz had been working on one of those high-profile buildings, and they were in a hurry because of some visitors from Moscow, Russia. A few men were still on the job site when Mama and I got there, but Fritz was clearly not one of them. She told me to stay back while she talked to the job foreman, like the manager. I hated being left behind, but a man in his position wouldn't want me in the conversation. So I waited where I could see their faces as my stomach twisted in knots. In response to Mama's question, the foreman shook his head and his mouth was turned into a distinct frown. He checked his watch and then spoke to her some more. Even from here, I could tell that nothing he had to say was good. Where was Fritz? I wanted to scream. Why were they just standing there talking? Finally, Mama's back stiffened and she clutched a handkerchief in her fist, but she only nodded, looking as if she wanted to scream, too. The foreman reached out a hand as if he might try to comfort her, but Mama stepped back, said a few more words, then turned. Without speaking, she grabbed my hand and yanked me into a walk so fast that I had to keep up with her. I almost had to jog along. Where is he? I asked. Mama, where's... Hush! Wait until we get home. The walk to the job site had taken less than half an hour, and though we were moving much faster now, it seemed like hours before we finally entered the safety of the apartment building. I asked again about what the foreman had said, but by then it took all Mama's efforts just to hold her emotions together. She didn't say a word until we were both inside our apartment and her trembling fingers had locked the door behind us. And then she collapsed on the ground and sobs poured out of her. The Stasi came to get him today, she said through choked breaths. They believed he was involved in Peter's escape attempt. They took him away. What will they do to him? I once overheard Papa telling my mother that he wasn't afraid of anything except our secret police. He said that if he were ever arrested, no matter what they did to him, his life would be over. I didn't know a lot about what happened to people after the Stasi got him. The only people who knew for sure were either the agents or people subjected to their interrogations or tortures. They rarely talked about what had happened to them, if they ever returned. Even the locations of the Stasi's prisons were secret, so I knew Mama couldn't answer any of my questions. But Fritz was her son. Even if we're the only based on instinct, she had to have some answers, some way to make this better. Except I had learned long ago that there were some things even a mother couldn't fix. She couldn't bring Papa and Dom back or bring us to them. She couldn't keep me from missing them every single day, and nobody I knew could bring down that wall. All my mother said was, they told Fritz it was only for questioning, but the foreman doesn't know if that is true. And then she turned to me. Are you sure Fritz knew about Peter's escape? He told me last night. And you waited this long to say anything? By the time Fritz told me, Peter had already left. I'm sorry, Mama. She closed her eyes, and the tears ran beneath her lashes like the steady leak of a pipe. Simile. I put my arms around her, hoping to comfort her a little. Go to bed, Gerta. I didn't want to. It wasn't my bedtime yet, and I wanted more than anything to stay awake until Fritz came home. If he came home. I'm going to Herr Kraus's apartment next door, Mama said. He will know if there's anything we can do. We didn't see Herr Kraus as often as we used to, not since Papa had left. Mama had brought him dinners after his wife had died last year, but she also felt it was dangerous for the Stasi to believe that we were anything more than casual neighbors. If she wanted to see him now, then I knew how frightened she was for Fritz. Let me come too, I said. You've done enough. Mama snapped. Then her eyes softened. I didn't mean that. Please go to bed. I kissed her cheek, though I'm sure she didn't feel it, and apologized again, and though I wasn't exactly sure what I'd done wrong. On the way to my bedroom, I passed Fritz's room. The door was closed tight, which I found odd because it hadn't been when we left. Maybe he'd come home while we were out. I turned the handle and darted in, fully expecting to see Fritz lying on his bed with his Beatles album turned low. I saw the record first, smashed on his floor like someone had crushed it beneath his boot. Fritz had a poster of Anne Margaret on his wall, supposedly a popular actress in America, but that had been ripped down and nothing but the tacked-in corners remained. The rest of his room was in disarray, with drawers pulled out and books thrown onto his bed, but nothing else seemed to be damaged. The Stasi had been here. They had stood right where I now did, and maybe gone through our entire apartment too. Although it should have shocked me more, somehow this seemed too normal. I told you to go to bed, Mama called from the front room. I almost asked her to come and see what had happened, but a voice inside me warned that it would be too much for her tonight. I planned to get up extra early in the morning and clean it for her. Then, when Fritz came home, and I had to believe that he would, everything would be okay again. Whether that was true or not, I chose to believe. I made myself believe it, or the worry would drive me insane. Ooh, things are getting good. See you tomorrow.